Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say rejoice. Hallelujah. Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 14th chapter. Great multitudes accompanied Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Or which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and take counsel whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends an embassy and asks terms of peace. So therefore, whoever of you does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple." Gospel of the Lord. Grace, peace, and much joy to you, people of God. On the way to Jerusalem and his cross, Jesus teaches about the cost of discipleship. It costs something to follow Jesus. Some of us remember the book of that name by the 20th century Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship, in which Bonhoeffer wrote, "When Christ calls a man, he calls him to come and die." And perhaps the radicality of that formulation puts into perspective the hyperbole with which Jesus teaches the cost of discipleship. No, he's not telling us literally to hate the people he's already commanded us to love. But the person and proclamation of Jesus create divisions, as we heard in the gospel from just a few weeks ago. It turns people against one another for Jesus' sake. And the one who would follow Jesus has a decision to make in those situations. Jesus says we must renounce our possessions. We must renounce family relations. We must renounce even ourselves. We must surrender all these things for the sake of following him. And this surrender is not like a kind of a Buddhist detachment so that we might become enlightened. Nor is it a kind of an ascetic practice. Lots of praying, lots of fasting, lots of all-night vigils, so that I might become kind of a spiritual avatar. It's much simpler than that. It's a matter of giving up things that are really quite important to me for the sake of something else that's more important to me. And that's the basic decision of following Jesus, right? When there are two ways set before us, we're at a decision point. Jesus says that if we want to build a tower or want to go to war, we better count the cost. And this is often interpreted as saying, so you really should make sure that you have enough. We like to think that way. Jesus says, count the cost. If you want to build that tower, if you want to go into that battle, make sure you have enough. And we like the sound of that. Because our whole lives are devoted to the whole project of getting enough and having enough and being enough. Enough power, enough popularity, enough prestige, enough power. But that interpretation doesn't make sense of Jesus' two little words, so therefore. After talking about counting the cost of discipleship, he says, so therefore, you must renounce all your possessions if you want to be my disciple. So see, that wouldn't make any sense if you need to count the cost and make sure you have enough. You need to count the cost so you'll realize that you don't have enough, and you never will have enough. But what you do have is enough to follow Jesus, because the cost is exactly one life. And that's what you have, exactly one life. And with that surrender, we are set free to follow. With that surrender, the choice between life and prosperity and death and adversity, the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked, all becomes clear in a way that it wasn't before. Because it's not, do I have it in me to be righteous? Do I have it in me to choose the good and to prosper? Or do I recognize that I don't have it in me and I have to trust God? And so I make the decision to surrender. We have a little object lesson of that in the second reading today, the shortest and most personal writing in the New Testament, Paul's letter to Philemon and his sister Aphia and Archippus, who may be a brother or a son. Their church has become a house church. They live in Colossae in Asia Minor, lots of early Christians there, and their house has become a house church. This is the way it was done while Christianity was illegal and you couldn't build a church to worship in. Somebody who was wealthy enough and whose house was large enough kind of converted their house into a church. And this is what Philemon has done. But alas, one of his slaves has run away, Onesimus. And he, Onesimus, has encountered St. Paul in imprisonment. Either in Caesarea Maritima, if it's before that last voyage to Rome, or his imprisonment in Rome itself, where he was imprisoned for 2 years at the end of his life. And he does refer to himself as being an old man in the letter. Paul does not command Philemon to emancipate Onesimus. He could draw on his apostolic authority. He doesn't do that. Because Philemon was like us. We like the idea of having somebody else to boss around and do what we say. It's a good feeling. Will Philemon be able to surrender that? Will he be able to give that up for the sake of following Jesus? If he does, Paul says, he will receive Onesimus back, no longer as a slave, but as a brother. As a brother in Christ. A new kind of relationship. And that's the new kind of relationship that we can have with our families, with our possessions, and even with ourselves. Because our baptism into Christ's death is a baptism into the self-emptying, self-giving, self-offering life that he is showing to us in his earthly walk. That's the person he's inviting us to follow. That's the proclamation he's inviting us to hear. And if we follow him to his cross, then we follow him to his empty tomb. And we receive back our lives and our possessions and our relationships, no longer as things that we can use to satisfy our desires and just keep trying to get enough, but as things which are now useful to us as we follow Jesus and choose life and choose the path that has us deeply rooted by the streams of living water. That's the Holy Spirit. And our hearts are refreshed. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.